It was so long ago that the memory of this event has become a fiction. A group of unknown entities set off on an indefinite intergalactic journey. During the entire journey, they did not meet anything that could interest them. Boredom. Their existence has become a routine. But one day one of the crew members came up with the idea that they could have fun with some kind of game. And he created a simulation in which he could take an active part. The game had a main plot, but the player could take actions bypassing the rules of the game, which ultimately led to unexpected outcomes. The game was interactive, something like virtual reality. And since the end of the game was unpredictable, the game did not lose its fascination by involving the player for a long time. First, the game developer tested the game on himself with an external trigger connected, capable of taking the player out of the game at any time if something suddenly goes wrong. As a result, the game came out as realistic as technology allowed. After testing in his free time, which was plenty, the developer was able to fully understand not only the game but also himself. He knew himself from a completely different side. The freedom of action of the game allowed him to fulfill the most hidden desires of his inner self. Flight in outer space no longer seemed to him a burden, but, on the contrary, gave him the opportunity to fly inside his fantasy. The team members, of course, saw what their colleague was doing, and soon they decided to find out why he did it and what meaning he put into it. After a colorful explanation, they also wanted to diversify their daily routine. And with each new participant, the plot of the game gradually changed. The actions of each were reflected not only in their own result, but also in the result of each player. The game turned out to be so exciting that the journey itself gradually lost its meaning. After some time, being completely absorbed in the game, the crew members stopped getting the same pleasure that they had at the very beginning. And one of the team members suggested a solution, to establish a rule according to which the player, being in the game, would not be aware that he was playing. With the help of simple algorithms, a change was made to the game that did not erase, but blocked the memory for the duration of the game session. But as soon as the game ended, the memory was restored, as well as the memory of the experience gained in the game. The new rules brought new facets of sensations and possibilities of the game, and the participants again plunged into virtual reality for a long time. But like everything else, new sensations gradually became old and interest in the game began to fade away. And then the players decided to exchange invented game stories, so that any member of the crew could live the experience of another. This entertainment has been provided for everyone and now for a longer time. However, it was not possible for all crew members to enter the game at the same time because someone had to monitor the spacecraft and the flight itself in general. Volunteers were found themselves, among those whose interest the game could not capture as much. But there were few of them and they would not be enough for piloting. Therefore, another rule appeared among the players, according to which they had to take turns keeping watch. And before diving into the game, the last adjustments were made. It was decided to combine all the stories into one and make a multiplayer mode. But besides that, secretly from everyone, the game developer disabled the initial triggers that could take team members out of the game. Now everyone could try on any role. Playtime stretched for many years. The journey continued, the crew members alternating watch-keeping with virtual reality. And soon those who were on duty began to notice strange things. The dark outer space, in which there was nothing remarkable, began to change. Glitches of light, flashes, strange lights began to appear. Soon the awake began to guess that the game was the cause of these phenomena, and the more difficult the game became, the more bizarre and ornate the phenomena became. Since the awake could see everything that happened in the game, it was not difficult for them to draw parallels. The more complex the plot of the game became, the more the space itself around the ship changed. Those who did not take part in the game and watched the changes in reality were afraid that this could lead to irreversible and tragic consequences. But they realized this too late, because now the game already influenced the world around it, shaping its eventfulness. Now the game could no longer be a means of entertainment and it was too risky to play it thoughtlessly. It was no longer possible to direct the ship to the target on the previous course because navigation aids began to fail, and the target itself could suffer from the impact on it of the reality that the crew members created around the ship. Soundwavegram enables developers to synthesize natural-sounding speech with dozens of voices, available in multiple languages and variants. It applies DeepMind's groundbreaking research in WaveNet and powerful neural networks to deliver the highest fidelity possible. Try right now. Sami, able to prepare the desired planet for settlement. It was necessary to urgently look for a way out of this situation. Together, the crew came to the decision that it was necessary to turn the plot of the game in such a way as to minimize the impact on the outside world, so as not to endanger the goal itself and the journey to it. It is difficult to say how realistic this task was, but there were no options and the players set about implementing what they had planned. Piloting the ship became more and more difficult and it was decided to remove as many crew members as possible from the game, leaving only those whose scenarios had the most active influence on the outside world. But the plan was doomed, because the developer turned off the ability to influence players from the outside, thereby eliminating awakening attempts. Then the Waking Ones tried to introduce a program code into the game, capable of convincing the player about the virtuality of the world with hints, signs and various tips, thereby prompting them to exit the game. And the plan worked, but only with a few of the many. After all, the players refused to believe that the world was not real, because they spent so much time here and absolutely do not remember themselves outside. To speed up the awakening, it was customary to send those who were able to exit the game back to the virtual world to help the others, but this had to bypass the memory lock that prevented them from remembering the real world. Once again, code was written to help the newly entered players retain some of the memory of their true purpose. Of course, the envoys did not try to awaken everyone, but only specialists in a certain field, to solve the problems that arose. The players were told that the actions of each led to the events and circumstances that are happening now in the game and beyond, and that there is an external world in which the strengths and abilities of each are necessary. That after awakening, everyone will be responsible for himself and for those who are still sleeping. However, the words of various missions were perceived as the ravings of the insane. The players did not realize the power of their own, individually and collectively, imagination. There was little time left, but there were more awakened ones. Accordingly, it was decided to strengthen the measures originally taken to control the players. The strengthening of the measures was such that the players began to notice the influence on events from outside. Many began to understand the words of the enlightened ones and began to guess about the existence of another reality. Curiosity began to push some in the right direction to realize that this world is false. But while some were approaching awakening, others were getting more and more stuck in the game reality, turning into doomed fanatics. The game still influenced the surrounding reality, but to a lesser extent, because some of the players began to realize virtual reality as a game, and someone even managed to get out of it and help the awake crew in controlling the ship. Those who left the game realized how, in fact, that virtual world was not important for each individual, that the main work and care is here, in the real world. Those who were still in the game were so enthusiastic that in addition to the scenario invented for the future, the past was also invented for each participant in the game. But this was not enough for reliability, and therefore a story was invented for the entire universe, starting from the Big Bang, to the compression of the universe into a point, at the end of its path. Thus, the power of imagination, seeping into the outside world, began to influence it more and more strongly. Reality, subject to the creative power of the playing crew, was no longer limited to the space around the ship. Now the influence of the game extended to the entire real world. Everything that was allowed in the game, now with a high probability, could be found in any corner of the universe. All devices, desires, emotions of the players were no longer virtual. The crew was excited that their kinsmen, who were to arrive next after them, would be exposed to the new reality and would have the traits of those who were still in the game. Now the restrictions that were invented for the game also affected the outside world, and it was not possible to turn them off like the game itself. Then it was decided to find the developer and call him to account, forcing him to fix everything that happened. But the crew member who developed the simulation did not take any part in it for a long time, because disappointed in what the other members had done with the game. It was he who first noticed that changes had taken place, and being unable to correct at least something, he completely devoted himself to piloting the ship. He felt guilty even though he wasn't guilty. After all, what the game has become is a matter of the collective mind of the players. In addition, it was he who offered all possible solutions to the problems of the awake crew members. It was now impossible to turn off the game either physically or for ideological reasons, since such an action could lead to the death of everything new and old that was in the world. Even though in some cases the new and the old mutually pushed each other. Therefore, the developer could only offer control of the new reality by directing the players in the right direction to achieve the most favorable effect. The new strategy implied a gradual adjustment of the actions of the players with the gradual withdrawal of each of the games. It just so happened that a lot of the game has evolved from a simulation into something more. Entities gained their mind and subsequently soul. At first, they did not affect either the course of the game or its manifestation in the real world. But gradually their role increased to the importance of the players themselves. The virtual world has become a full-fledged reality for those who were born from the imagination of the players. The moment came when the last member of the crew was taken out of the simulation, and now the game and the reality around were already dependent on the influence of internal entities, which increasingly identified themselves as intelligent beings. In the outside world, a meeting system was set up to manage the game in order to achieve the desired results in reality. The crew and the entities from the simulation kept in touch to communicate and receive instructions second from the first. The people in the simulation gradually figured out that they were the key to fixing the situation. They gained free will and actions equivalent to those of the playing crew members. Having received such advantages, people could rise in their development to unlimited heights. Virtual life began to develop. At first, this did not meet the interests of the creators, because people were less and less controllable. The game was not supposed to go beyond the script written by the crew members. But since she has long left not only the framework of the script, but also the space around, with her influence, all the restrictions that are possible have been removed. Space. Purpose of travel. Reality and simulation. Two kinds of entities. Everything, it would seem, is so different and disunited, but now it is not possible for one to exist without the other. Now the main task of the crew members is to bring both realities together for further coexistence. There was still the ability to connect to the game, but there were also restrictions for players. People from the simulation could not get into another reality, but instead, they had the opportunity of unlimited development to the level of a god inside the simulation itself. Their spiritual potential is now the force that forms both realities. To minimize the development of chaos, people were ordered to move in the direction given in the scenario prescribed by the crew members. Internal vibrations, on which everything that exists is built, are an important component of development. People have learned to show emotions in their reality. Emotions that are an external manifestation of the internal vibrations of love or fear. Depending on the predominance of one emotion over another, reality was shaped towards prosperity or chaos. The power of emotion and the power of collective consciousness, that's what can turn this world upside down, turn it into what our attention is aimed at. In what emotions we experience, what we think. For the stable development and prosperity of all things, it was necessary to master the ability to control thoughts and emotions, learn to weed out lies from the truth, and be ready for self-improvement. Pay attention to where your attention is directed, the attention of your loved ones and their friends, and friends of their friends. And understand what the concentration not on the creative component will lead to. This has been happening for a long time. Tracking negative changes in our reality is not so difficult. A book written by someone with a plot will definitely be read, and thus the plot will open the door to our world for implementation. Every movie, computer game, song or joke, it's all scripts that you write yourself. And sooner or later each of them will happen to you, or your children, or any other person. An example is teenagers who, having watched plenty of TV shows or played enough games, transfer the behavior of the main characters to their image, thereby trying to imitate, and in fact, contribute to the flow of fictional stories into our reality. And this is not just psychology, it is something more, acting on a subtle, intangible plane. The more people know a certain plot story, the greater the influence of the plot on the reality around. And it would seem that this is fine, but, on the other hand, it causes quite big problems. Reality should not deviate significantly from the one prescribed in advance, the one that is thought out to achieve the common good. Man, being a projection, albeit a very realistic one, may well feel his role, a significant role in the history of the world. Then it is necessary to realize oneself in accordance with the sensations, simultaneously integrating into one's behavior model, the behavior model of one of the historical characters, because each significant one has already played its role, and will play it again. Bets are placed on key characters in order to avoid deviations from the axis of development of reality. Thus there is fate, the ability to discover blocked knowledge in oneself. This applies to everyone without exception, both villains and peacekeepers from the historical past. The energies of the characters of the past flow into our present for their realization, because it is known that energy does not come from nowhere and does not disappear into nowhere. This does not mean that a person who has done terrible things in the past is doomed to repeat his path. This means that the experience of a past life, being remembered, must be worked out and processed, excluding negative manifestations. I think that it is already clear that by living your scenario in such a way that it leads to your development, you help not only to become better for yourself, but also for others, those who have not yet realized the rules of the game. A logical question may arise for someone who has a lively, inquisitive mind: if everything is a simulation, then the person and everything around him is not real, and why then try to change anything? Man is a set of light and matter. Light and matter in turn are vibrations with different characteristics. This is a kind of program code that creates everything around. And this tool is available to everyone to change reality. And everyone is constantly busy with this process, reading a book, preparing dinner, doing routine work, drinking too much or watching this movie. Regardless of desire, you are constantly changing reality, but in which direction, it already depends on whether you raise or lower the level of vibrations. Each simulation particle contains a reflection of the entire simulation. It's like the Mandelbrot set. By changing a small fraction in your body, you rewrite the code of the whole body, and by changing yourself, you rewrite the code of the whole universe. The light contained in you in the form of vibration spreads throughout the simulation, affecting everything that exists in it. Essentially, light carries information. Light is information. One thing changes, the other changes. Simply put, you are given not only to contemplate, but also to create. You can heal any disease, learn all the secrets and develop to the level of a god. But in order to heal everyone, and everyone to develop to the level of a god, it is necessary to make changes to the program code of at least more than one person. Then the very concept of disease will disappear and divinity will become self-evident. Do not rush to laugh at those who have learned a fraction of the secrets of the universe and are trying to help others in this. For example, those who broadcast about the need for food as a psychological addiction. In fact, the only thing stopping you from going without food is the belief that food is a necessity. It's as programmed into you as everything else. And this is not as difficult to get rid of as it might seem. Now humanity is facing a decisive stage in changing the entire program at once, and not for each one individually. The consequences of delaying change for the better are already visible. And every day the reality is slipping more and more towards chaos. Help change yourself and everyone. This step is not completed, although you do not know that you did it a long time ago. Someone manipulates the knowledge and consciousness of everyone to achieve goals unknown to you. But, as mentioned, you need to move in the direction of prosperity, and only love, its vibrations and subsequent positive changes will help in this.